Hello. I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 252. I hope that you'll pre-order my new book. It's named after this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women, and you can find it at adhdforsmartwomen.com/book. I guess the browsers, they don't like the word ass, so you get blocked if that's in your URL. So it is adhdforsmartwomen.com. My purpose, as you know, is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. Not one. And so, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Lisa Lewis. Lisa Lewis is an HR professional with over 12 years of comprehensive human resources and management experience. She's passionate about learning development, creating systematic processes to build a high-performance workforce and team culture development. Lisa values empathy, dignity, and respect in the workplace with a clear focus on diversity, equality, and inclusion. Lisa received a late diagnosis of ADHD and now attributes her diverse background and success to her neurodiversity. Originally from Toronto, Ontario. Why am I having such problems with your bio? I don't know. Ontario. She's moved back and forth across Canada, lived for a few years in the United Kingdom, and she's had the opportunity to work and travel to over 40 countries. Lisa is a mother of 2 neurodiverse teen girls, has an addiction to TED Talks, collects cats, but not on purpose. I love that one. And loves trail running for health and sanity with her 2 husky Malamute crosses. Lisa, welcome. Did I get all of that right? Even though I sputtered all over it.
You did. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So before we talk about what it is that you do, I would love to know about your background, specifically your ADHD diagnoses. Can you give us a story? What happened? How did it come about?
Sure. So I've been working in the field of neurodiversity for about 25 years. I kind of fell into it. So I was, about 25 years ago, was trained in applied behavior analysis, and I was working for the regional program back in Toronto. And then when I moved over across Canada to Vancouver Island, I was working for the regional program here. And so most of the kids that we were working with had an autism diagnosis or a co-occurring diagnosis of ADHD, learning disabilities, multiple other things. And I had been working with these kids for ages, and probably it was about 8 or 9 years ago, my boss at the time said, we were talking late at night, and she said, you know, you have adult ADHD. And I was like, shut up. What are you talking about? And she was like, yeah, you do. And so when we hung up, I Googled, the traits of ADHD, and I think 12 came up and I had 11. So I was like, well, maybe she's got something here. And so I went to have an official diagnosis. And so I went to show up at the medical center to meet the psychiatrist, and a friend of mine who I don't even really know was working there. And she was like, hey, like, what are you doing here? I'm like, well, apparently I might have ADHD. And she's like, you think? And I was like, all these people have known me for years and no one said anything beforehand. And I've been working with, so many kids and people who had ADHD, but couldn't see the traits in myself. So I went in and I was talking to the psychiatrist, and he looked very psychiatristy. He had, the elbow pads and, the little tiny glasses, and he's very, very serious and studious. And we sit down, he starts asking me questions. And then I was getting irritated because he was talking too slow. And I was just like, wait. I'm like, why don't I just tell you why I think I'm here? And he's like, all right. And so I yammered off about this and this and this and this. And then he's like, can I finish? And I was like, sure. So, I think we talked for about an hour and a half. And then he was like, so it sounds like you have a couple questions about ADHD. And I said, well, yeah, this is something that, I thought I wasn't smart when I was a kid. It would explain so much, like, this is why I'm here. And he said, well, in the diagnostic, when you're diagnosing someone with ADHD, there's a lot of gray. There could have, a lot of different childhood trauma and different things could, be portrayed as ADHD. He's like, but you're like the most ADHD person I have ever met. Usually, I first recommend mindfulness, but we're going straight to medication, and signed it off. And it was just kind of funny the way I was just like took over the assessment. And then when I decided to take a mindfulness course, and it was almost like putting Tabasco in my eyes. It was like so slow. And they're saying, okay, well, we'll look at the person in front of you. Is it soft? Is it, whatever. And I was just like, come on. Just give me the tools so I can get out of here. I got other things to do. But yeah, a lot of things have changed since then.
So I'm curious, what was Lisa like as a child?
It would surprise many people who know me now. But I was extremely shy. I was very quiet, well, especially at school. The friends that I had, I was like the sheep. I was the follower. The friends that were very bossy, they were like, hey, I remember this one girl, she had these long braids. I don't remember what her name was. And she was like, hey, come on, hold my racket. We're going to go over there. I'm going to beat up those boys over there. Grab my bag. And I was like, all right, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Half the time I would, if I was at home, I would go call on the neighbors' dogs instead of people to go hang out with. I was just very quiet and shy and reserved. And then when I hit high school, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden I just started talking, and I haven't stopped talking since. I was just
It's interesting because we know dopamine modulates estrogen. And I believe that where most ADHD shows up for women is in puberty. So it makes sense.
That would make total sense. I when I was younger, I always felt awkward, I just felt like I didn't fit in or didn't belong. When I got into high school, I got some confidence. I kind of like fit in with a bunch of different groups. I would like flit around. I would, I was very athletic, so I hung out with the athletic people, and there was the goth kids, and I would like to hang out with them, and I had some cool, relationships there, and I would just kind of flit around. But I was like the goofy one. I was the clown, and I just kind of jumped around. And in some social settings, I was on fire, and I was just like, I owned the group, and in other times, I was just like a gangly, awkward teenager. It just didn't seem to.
It's interesting your story though, because what I typically hear is women who have ADHD, and when they were younger, they were really confident, and then they got into their teen years and the confidence just plummeted. Versus with you, it almost sounds like it was a little bit opposite.
It was definitely opposite. But I also, again, after listening to quite a few women in your podcast, I knew there was something different. I knew there was something wrong, and I couldn't figure it out. With academics, it was hard, but not consistently hard. I was pretty much an A/B student, but I had to work hard at it. Some subjects I flew through, others, especially math. I didn't like math, and my parents were very wanted to make sure that I, had a good academic standing. So they always wanted me to take the advanced math. So I would go before and after school to tutor and to make sure that I was in there. I would do well on projects, tests and exams. I had no memory, and things would just, when I would try to study or things like this, I remember just seeing black, and I was like, why is my mind, like, I literally saw black. Like, I don't understand. I couldn't figure out why I was different and why I couldn't think. And it didn't help that my best friend at the time always got like 110%. She got all the bonus questions. She applied to Harvard. And my mom was always like, why can't you be more like Lori? Why can't you do this? And I couldn't figure out what was different between her and I. And it was I just figured that I wasn't very smart.
Because when you talked to her, when you interacted with her, you felt like you guys were basically the same person.
Yeah. And I couldn't figure out why, during certain classes, it just all came to me. And I understood it, I got it, and I excelled. And then in other classes, I just couldn't get it. It didn't matter how many times I repeat, or I would read something, and by the time I got to the bottom of the page, I'd forgotten what I had read, like it just didn't sink in. And I was like, how can I make this happen? How can I make this work?
Oh shoot. I had a follow-up question and it just went phew and gone. Um, It'll come the minute I start asking the next question. That's how it always happens. So I remember in your letter to me, you sent me an email and you wrote that you just didn't think you were smart enough to go to college, so you didn't go to college. Yet you were an AB student. So how are you an AB student, yet you still don't think you're smart enough to go to college?
I was completely insecure, and I knew that there was something different, and I knew that I was having these difficulties in studying, and I didn't want to be embarrassed by not getting in. So I would just say, I'm not going to put myself out there. I was always good at
helplessness.
Yeah, I just figured in my head, people who went to university were all brilliant, and I was not that. And so I didn't even look at it. So I was always good at art. And so I decided to take graphic design, not because it was something that I was dying to do, but it was just something that was in the art field that I knew that I could make money at. And so I got enrolled in the local college and went to do that. But then I sorry?
I remembered what my question was. So when you said that you were just so inconsistent, you would do really well in one class and then you wouldn't do well in another class. Do you now know what the difference was?
It was interest.
Yeah.
It was completely interest, because even in certain modules of science, I would get 100%. If it was something that I was interested in, and I would just click and I would get it. But if it wasn't something that I was interested in, and math was not something I was interested in, it just didn't happen. Like even now, like trying to play crib, I can't do math in my head. Don't even ask me. I'm not going to play crib. I'm not going to play cards. It gives me so much anxiety, and it's ridiculous because it's like basically counting to 20. Like I can't. Just don't ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you would continue your story that I so rudely interrupted. So you graduate from high school, you enroll in this graphic design. Was that a program or?
Yeah, it's it was a 2-year program. I enjoyed it. I was doing really well. But then I kind of pulled a Lisa where, it was like a month or two before I was to graduate. One of my good friends, she was moving to Scotland. That's where she had dual citizenship, and she was going to train to be a midwife. And she was like, Lisa, you should come to Scotland. And I was like, I had all these different excuses. I had never been on a plane. I had never been anywhere. And I was like, oh, it's really important. I have to stay here and blah, blah, blah. And she said,
plus you have to graduate, right?
Yeah. And she said to me, Lisa, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I was like, it just clicked. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go. It's much more important to go find myself than to finish these last 2 months of school after, spending.
What did your parents say?
Well, they weren't happy. But but they have always been very supportive of me, and they knew that I was going to do what I was going to do. They always called me the fruitcake growing up. I was always the flaky one who was always like, oh, it was like, oh, of course you did, Lisa. Of course you did. I was always all over the place. And so I meant to go to the UK for, maybe a month or two. Ended up staying probably about 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where, at the time, I thought that it was, me being flaky and flighty and not being consistent. And then looking back, that is my wanting to, like, I love talking to people and being impulsive, how kind of my life played out. So like I go to Scotland, and then I was working at a photography gallery, and I was working at a cafe, and I started talking to people, and one of the chefs was like, I'm going to move up to the Highlands, and I got a job at a resort there. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. Let's do that. And so I just like followed her along up to the Highlands of Scotland to Ullapool. So it had like, you know, 5 pubs, no grocery store. The next town was an hour and a half away, and it was like totally remote and beautiful and amazing. And I remember Leonard Cohen had a house there. And I remember sitting in Leonard Cohen's house. He wasn't there, but I was just like, I can't even believe I'm here. And then I met this Aussie couple, and they were like, you know what? We've got friends, or a friend who's in the Tour de France. We're going to go follow him around. We're going to follow the Tour de France. And I was like, well, that sounds like an awesome idea. So I quit my job, and with this couple, just the 3 of us, we get into the VW van, and we spend the summer following the Tour de France. We get down to Spain. They're like, you know what, let's go to the running of the bulls. Let's go to the running of the bulls. And, while I was there, we ended up staying at a campground that was full of Hell's Angels. And they made these garbage pails full of sangria. And we just hung out with these Hell's Angels and went to the running of the bulls, not a bullfight. And it was so much fun.
Did you actually do the running of the bulls? Were you one of the people running?
We watched the run, but the wildest thing happened. So we watched the run, and so every day for 7 days they have the running, and then they have the bullfight at night. I didn't want to see a bullfight, but the coolest thing happened. So like when you go to the running of the bulls, they run through the town, and then they go into this large arena, and there's tons of people all wearing white and red in the arena, and the bulls come in, and then they run through, and then they go through back into the back area. And then they let out 2 bulls at a time. And I don't understand the whole background of it, but it's the bulls getting their revenge. So all these people would sit down in front of the doors, and the bull would run over them, and then they would kind of run around, and then people would kind of like chase the bulls with newspapers and hit them, and then the bulls would like lie down. But the coolest thing happened. They would let out 2 dairy cows, and the dairy cows would come out. And I don't know how they knew where the bull was on their own, sandwich the bull and walk him back in. And then they would do this again. It was kind of wild to see how the animals just knew how to do this. But yeah. And so then I realized I had no money. And so I was like, okay, well, I know I've got to do something. And they were going to follow on. So they ended up dropping me off in Toulouse. And I had enough for a flight to Wales, where a friend of mine lived. But it wasn't until the next day. And I had a tin of beans, and I think I had like maybe €2 or €3. And I didn't even have a can opener. And the flight wasn't until the next day. And I just figured I would just hang out at the airport until then. And then they were like, 11 o'clock, I didn't realize everyone was gone. They're like, you have to leave. And it's in the middle of nowhere in the south of France. And I was like, I have nowhere to go. No l'argent, nothing. And they were like, too bad, out. So of course it's, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I call my mother and say, I'm in the south of France and I've got no money and I'm in the dark and who knows. And so just to give her a complete heart attack, and then went to go sleep on a park bench. And then these men came out and they said, you have to leave. And I said, I had no money. And they checked through on my bag, and I just kind of sat there. And trying to talk to them, and they were like, come on in. And where the bags go around, that's where I slept. And they gave me juice and muffins. And when I woke up in the morning, because it's such a small airport, they were like, oh, you're the girl who slept on the the luggage rounds. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, well, your flight was at 7 at night, and now you're here at 7 in the morning, and you can, hang out with the pilots. And I was like, amazing. So then I went to Wales and I started bartending there, and I was a terrible, terrible bartender. But it was okay because it was a super busy, like a nightclub pub. People would come up and they would say, I want a pint of this. And I would say, here you go. And they're like, that's not it. And I'm like, you're fine. Here you go. Someone else. They would just got whatever they got.
So that was the perfect place for you to pub, right? Or you to bartend.
And then, I met people there, and then we went through Ireland and France, and then, I came back home. It was just...
You forgot about the selling firecrackers out of the back of a moving truck?
Oh, well, and this is the thing is like, people would always just say like, Lisa, you just talk to anyone. And it's not just me. It's my mom's side of the family. She has 4 sisters, and all of us are the exact same. We just talk to anybody. And so, I would go someone would mention something about, this. And I was like, hey, I'll do that. And it was like, I had all these different jobs, but it was like for here, just picking them up here and there. So like, yeah, would sell firecrackers out of the back of the moving truck for May long weekend or whatever else, or selling flowers on the side of the highway. I remember going into a hair salon when I was like 15, and I kind of like walked through, and there was a really cute hairdresser working there. And I was just like, well, look, it's like you need some help here. There's some dust around here. You should hire me on. And so, I worked there for a little while. I worked at a mortgage office. Like I kind of just, and almost didn't even look for jobs. I would just start talking to people and things would pop up. And so I'd be like, sure, I'll do that. Why not? I'll, sell bingo cards. I'll bartend. I'll do whatever you want.
Were your parents worried?
Well, yes, it was always just like I was the flaky one. I was the one like with the head of my clouds and just kind of like,
So how many kids are in your family?
There's myself and my sister.
And was your sister completely different than you?
The opposite of me in every single way. She's blonde and she's quiet and she's very straightforward. She's the best person in the world. I always tell her I like you and nobody else. She's completely hilarious, and she's just, she's amazing.
But she was really studious, didn't have problems with school, just kind of skated through.
No, well, yeah, she had her few bumps in high school. She would, but she's just she's straight. She doesn't have the impulsivity. She doesn't have. It's like an opposite personality type. Now, my mother is different, where we're almost like, I don't know if we're oil and water or oil and oil, where we're always clashing. And I can't tell if it's like because we're exactly the same or different. And when I told her I had ADHD, she's like, oh, Lisa, come on. You're always just like putting these things out there. And then after, she...
Well, and that feels good, right?
Right. Well, and then, her sisters were all like, you know what? Like, you do too. Like, you are
Meaning your mom does.
Yes. And so now she says she has ADHD, XYZ. She has all the letters. She's got all the things.
So wait a minute. So now your mom says she has ADHD, or is she talking about you?
Her, that she does.
Oh.
And she totally, and
so she dismissed it in you, but now she's like, I've got it. But does she now agree that you have it too?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
And it's just, the not knowing. She didn't understand what it was. And it was just like, oh, you're off on another tangent on something else, But look, like she is an amazing woman. Like when I was born, she was a Swiss chalet waitress. And she worked her way, from there. And then she got a job as a bank teller and then, to the manager of the bank. And then she became one of the top mortgage brokers in Canada. And she doesn't have post-secondary education, but because she's a talker, you know what I mean? Everybody loved her. And I remember she would work like a dog. She would come home from work and she would sit down to eat, and she had to take like 20 minutes to like just catch her breath, to like unwind. But if someone needed help or someone needed anything, she was there. Everyone called her the angel. And she's funny as hell. My family's all from Newfoundland and they're all hilarious. But yeah, we very much love each other and get along, or we fight even when we're agreeing about the same thing. I'll be like, I'm agreeing with you. And she's like, oh my gosh.
Well, it sounds like it probably is because you are so alike. She knows exactly who you are. She can feel it. And so when she sees you making what she thinks, maybe she made that mistake before, right? She can see it. Even if it turns out right, she's worried because it's not what she would decide to do.
Exactly. And I think it's the emotional regulation piece as well, where it's like, when we're happy, we're super happy. And when we're upset, we're like, it's just like heartbreaking. And so when she gets worried, it stresses her out so much. And she just like, it almost gets like an anger, you know what I mean? Because you just want to make sure everything's going to be okay. And it's funny because I recognize a lot of my mother's traits when I'm with my own girls. Where when they get hurt, I almost get upset, like, oh, like I can't get hurt, because it's just like, it almost like takes pieces out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lisa, the fruitcake, found an area 20 years ago that she fell in love with. And so she's not a fruitcake anymore, right?
No, no, it's yeah, I felt like I've come into my own, and getting the diagnoses um really helped me understand who I was before and who I am now, and things make sense. And I think when you get a diagnosis and you start learning about how your own brain works and what works for you, and you're learning all these different strategies, and you realize that you had already created these strategies in the past
Yeah.
without realizing that that's what you were doing.
Yeah.
And it's it I make more sense to me now than I did before, where before I just felt like I was lost. I felt broken and just like, why can't I do anything right? And then I realized I did everything that I was meant to do to get
Yeah.
to the place where I'm at now.
Yeah. And I'm sure all of those jobs, every single one of them, there was a little piece that you figured out one more thing about yourself.
Oh, 100%. And then everything that everywhere that you go and everyone that you meet and all the education that you do, it all builds together
Yeah.
and relates to each other somehow and can help you out as you go on. It's I think this is why I have my addiction to TED Talks. My husband, he's always like, Lisa, it's not normal to do like 10 workshops in a week, or I love the learning. I love listening, and TED Talks is the stories. You know what I mean? It's not just rote basic facts. It's like something with depth, and it's an experience, and it's uh, I just find it so captivating.
So, is there anything else that's changed since you were diagnosed?
Yes, and I feel like I was lucky because I was able to be on both sides of the fence, as like at one point as a seemingly neurotypical,
Hmm.
and then again as like a someone who was neurodiverse, where I went to school. I learned all about applied behavior analysis, and this, which is like the science of human behavior, and I was working with all these kids who had an autism diagnosis. And I remember one particular time I was working with this little guy. He was adorable, and we were working on emotional regulation. And he kept saying to me, I think he was 5, and he said, Lisa, this isn't working. And I said, well, the book says that works. And, all we have to do is we have to try a little bit harder and practice a little bit more, and you're going to
Hmm.
get it. Because, I read all the books and I'm the adult, and this is what we have to
Hmm.
do. And then I was diagnosed, and I tried these same strategies on myself. And I was like, wow, I should have listened to that 5-year-old when he said that strategy was not working for him.
Yeah.
And you need to listen to the individual and follow and work together to figure out what strategies are going to work and how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I think before, where I had all this rote learning, and um, you know, I was very grateful for having the opportunity to learn so much about all these different neurodiversities, um, the science, and the basic information around it. But I also, at the same time, have met hundreds of people who are neurodiverse because, as we know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so I worked with so many kids, but then their families would come in and they're like, I'm not diagnosed, with autism, but, I can read a book in a weekend. And, I'm a chemical engineer and I travel all around the world and I don't like anyone sitting on the left side of my couch.
Uh,
She's like, I get it. And
they're all different, though, right? It's kind of like ADHD. You meet one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. We are all so different.
well, that's exactly, the more that I learn about ADHD and neurodiversity,
Hmm.
the more that I know I don't know, because
Yeah.
it is so vast. And I've worked and been friends with, and been around so many people, and I've never met two alike, and never have two um, people where it gets so you don't even see any differences because it's just the person. Like, both of my girls have ADHD, and all three of us present completely differently, and we're from the same gene pool. You know what I mean?
In what way? Can you explain?
Um, Well, Priya, she's more like me. She's constantly thinking, going, both of us have never been on time, not super late, but, always a little bit late, a little bit more impulsive. Um, where Callie, I don't think she's got the H. She's got the hyperactivity. She was always like, we'd be eating dinner and all of a sudden she starts scaling the walls and she doesn't stop talking or moving and she's got like more confidence than you've ever seen anyone. She's just like a firecracker. She's hilarious. And it's just, but she's on time and she gets all of her projects done on time. Where Priya and I, it's the very last minute. It just
Yeah.
waits till like you're just skimming the edge of the line.
Yeah.
Um, but it's cool, you know what I mean? Because we are different. And, like if you go to the DSM and you have your diagnostic criteria. So like, for, let's say for autism, you have to hit so many traits in these 3 different domains. But let's say you have some, but not all, you still have those difficulties. You know what I mean? You may still have a hard time with social communication or whatever else, but you don't have all of the traits. So now you're neurotypical because you didn't hit a few.
Yeah.
It's everybody has things that they have a hard time with and whatever else. And, our ADHD makes it difficult, but also amazing. And so you just have to like work with the individual to find out what works and what doesn't and support the person for who they are. It doesn't really matter the criteria.
I had a guest come on who, Anjanette Wilkinson. She's ADHD and has autism. And she explained it so, like, I'd never heard it explained in that way. And I thought it was brilliant. She said, I feel like it's a constellation, right, in the sky. And however many stars come into, those are symptoms, right, or traits, however many stars are more in one area versus another, that's the label that you get. But it's all different. And sometimes there's a bunch of labels, right? But it feels to me like it's all part of the same thing.
Well, completely. And like,
Mhm.
I don't like, I did feel broken. I did feel like I wasn't enough. I always felt lesser than.
Mhm.
And I'm tired of it. I don't want to feel like that. Um, and I used to get so tired of hearing the us and them. You know what I mean? Like someone with, ADHD, they're always late or they're always disorganized. And I'm
Right.
like, really? Have you met everyone? Like I
Mhm.
myself, I am like ridiculously organized. Like I cannot answer an email if there's dishes in the sink.
Yeah.
But my friends are the opposite. So how can you say that everyone has all of these traits?
Yeah.
Or sorry, I forgot what I was even going to say. I remember when I was diagnosed, and I was working at a clinic, and one of the analysts who also had ADHD, she said, "You know what? To learn a little bit more about this, why don't you read Dr. Russell Barkley's
Mm.
Taking Control of Your Adult ADHD?"
Yeah.
And so I started reading it, and I picked it up and put it down 3 times because I was so completely overwhelmed.
Mhm.
Where when I had my, when I looked it up and there was those 12 kind of, basic traits around ADHD,
Yeah.
that was okay because they were very basic. But when he starts discussing all the different traits, I think there was like 44 different traits, but they were so specific. And it was like, has a hard time with budgeting and drives
And
fast. And
so
it was like,
negative.
right. But it's also like, are you in my house? Like, how do you know I drive fast?
Yeah.
And it was like, where does ADHD end and I begin? Like it was just too much. Like, cause there are like thousands of Lisas running around who are exactly the same as me. And I didn't get it.